Good evening and welcome. My name is Andile Magengelele, as you can see on the program. I'll be moderating this conversation this afternoon. And with me, I'm joined by, on my immediate right, by Mercedes Vilardell from Spain. Here she's written as a collector, but I'd like to correct that a bit. She is more of a philanthropist, for she has contributed quite immensely toward the development of contemporary art in the continent and in different countries, in Lubumbashi, within Asiko, in Douala. And yes, she is a collector. Collector in the sense that she does not only buy art at a secondary market. She gets it directly from the gallery so as to benefit and for the development of the creative industries. Our next panelist is Rhode, which I'm sure I don't have to introduce. He is from South Africa originally, who left just after a minute when the country got free. He is currently based in Berlin. His artistic trajectory has been quite written and his work has been widely critiqued. I would like to say that when I first met Robin a long time ago, my opinion is that his work was much more edgier. And I do not say by that his work is not edgier now. He's widely collected and by museums and institutions.
But we have quite an interesting backstory. We met in Johannesburg many years ago, and we were both quite young and trying to establish ourselves in the South African art world. And I was doing a lot of street art at the time, I think.
Yes, a street art, but also an analyst on cricket. Do you still?
I am still an analyst on the game of cricket, yes.
Yes. And then, of course, we've got Joost Bosland, who is a director of Stevenson Gallery, which has got two spaces, one in Johannesburg and one in Cape Town. Now, Joost has been a leading figure in bringing to South Africa internationalism, because we are coming from a background of cultural boycott and we never had an opportunity of seeing global art. And that nearly left the country in a cultural Chernobyl. Joost is not only a director at Stevenson, he is also an his artistic vision has informed the very interesting program of Stevenson. And welcome everybody. Our topic this afternoon is African art in contemporary collections. And I thought I can just expand a little bit on that and also look at the role of curators, those who live in Africa and those that are in diaspora. Now, both the gallerists and the curators in shaping the trajectory of African contemporary art market. So we're going to talk a little bit about a bit of art history and of course, the till, because artists do need to buy good pencil sharpeners and brushes. Welcome. This panel will address a global phenomenon of the art market and the manifold of narratives. So the first I would like to speak about, go back a little bit when South Africa, this is not narrowly about South Africa, this is about the global art market. But one would think that because we've got two, like one artist from South Africa who is currently based in Berlin and Joost, it's not about that. But because there's two galleries here that are coming from the continent, it is
three actually. Statements has a gallery from Tunisia as well.
Which one?
At Statements there's a gallery from Tunisia as well.
Thank you. But also there's more artists from the continent who are represented by other galleries. I would like to start first with Robin to to give us his insight and travel with us from when he left South Africa as a young artist and his artistic practice in a global arena, and how has that impacted on the economy. When I said economy, on the currency of his art.
I mean, first of all, I think that when I was still living in South Africa, looking at 1999, 2000, 2001, I moved to Berlin in 2002 permanently. But during this time, you must understand that in South Africa and for the rest of the African continent, as young artists, you do not have a lot of commercial pressure like other parts of the world. For example, when I traveled to the United States, for example, the amount of kind of commercial pressure young students already have there is something which we don't experience as young people on the African continent. So when I was a young artist, there were so few galleries that I could be allowed to express a kind of artistic freedom compared to European or American young artists. So being a young artist in South Africa, I was afforded this kind of possibility to be as radical as I could. I had to focus on my practice. I had to try and develop an interesting, authentic language that came through my lived experience as a youth growing up in South Africa without any commercial pressure, without having access to art fairs, without having access to commercial gallery spaces. There was only one major gallery at that time in South Africa. So if you're not in that commercial gallery, you were outside of the system. So for a large period of my sense of being a young artist, I was totally free and outside of the commercial system. My work was also not really collected at the time, maybe by one or two corporations in South Africa, but that was it. So to sustain your practice as a young artist, not only in South Africa, but in the African continent, it's quite hard. But at the same time, you have this luxury of not being under this commercial strain. Now, when I started living in Europe, it was a different kind of dynamic that I was experiencing there as a young artist, because the artists, my peers in Berlin, for example, or in Europe, they were more versed in the philosophies. They were more versed in the theories, Western modernity. I was not. My engagement with Western modernity and theory, cultural theories, etc., was quite limited because of the educational system in South Africa, which is very, I would say, quite provincial in a way, to focus on contemporary South African artists rather than to look outside of the African continent to other artists from the international world. So it was very difficult for me to adapt to the context of being in the diaspora and being in Berlin. To go to exhibitions, for example, I found it quite difficult because a lot of the art exhibitions I saw were so theoretically driven, were so philosophically referential, that it took me a long time to develop the vocabulary in understanding the points of inspiration from my artistic peers. So it took a very long time for me to find my own path in this, I would say, the Western discourse of contemporary art. And only after many years did I realize how important it was for me to maintain my South African identity, to embrace my lived experiences in South Africa, to understand how valuable and how authentic my creative output or my aesthetic can be within the greater discourse of contemporary art. People want to hear new stories. I began to realize that being from the geographical periphery could be a strength, because I'm able to tell a story that my peers in Europe and the United States are unable to tell. that I still have a sense of freedom from the commercial world that they do not have. So sometimes the weaknesses that you have can become your strength in the long term.
Thank you. So do you think that in a way that was not a paralysis to your artistic development, was then
Initially I thought it would be a paralysis, it would limit me. But at the same time, it allowed me to develop a specific visual vocabulary and a historical vocabulary to allow my work to chart a new territory within Europe or the United States. So another very important issue is that I think a lot of contemporary artists from Africa do not want to be pigeonholed and seen only as South African or African artists. I believe that we see ourselves as part of the greater context of the international world. I always believe that in order for my work to be critically acknowledged, or to be commercially acknowledged, it also has to be referential and relational to the greater discourse, whether it's within the European, whether it's in the American, whether it's the Asian or Latin America. So,
On that note, that's why I'm excited to sit here with you. Mercedes, for
and
example.
why not with me?
No, with you. I'm pointing at all three of you. This is.
To be referred to the rest of the world as a reference on continent. Is our own continent at the end of the much larger than all the rest of the continents.
I think Mercedes, your collection is a great example of that, at being universal at the same time and then looking at specific geographies. For me, what's been exciting in working with Robin is that I quite often meet collectors who know his work, own his work, and didn't realize they were collecting African art. They really like the work. They respond to your symbolism, to your visual language, but they were not aware of or didn't think twice about Robin being an African artist. That wasn't. I think that's changed a little bit in the last few years, where there's so much press coverage. I mean, if you read the Financial Times, every other week there's an article about the boom in contemporary African art, which
it's very dangerous.
Which we can speak about later. But that's made collectors much more conscious of geographic origins of art, which is two-sided at best.
A lot of pressure, much more pressure on the artists in the continent. No?
Because probably artists that are living and working on the continent feel that because of this, the new focus on African art, the works need to embody some kind of exoticism of the continent rather than trying to reach out or trying to create bridges, aesthetic bridges and historical bridges with the rest of global world.
Just to unpack this whole global narrative of Africa being fashionable, what I find interesting, though, that we're sitting here and then I see this is a salon, and one immediately, it invokes, when you read the evenings of Gertrude Stein, sitting with his brother Leo and Picasso and the whole school of Paris School of Art. Now, this takes us back a long time ago that, of course, African art has always been fashionable. How it has also influenced modernism within Western art history, and how, besides the fact that it's influenced, that it has also gone to influence the German expressionism or Dadaism after that. Now, what does that mean when when African contemporary art is so fashionable? Does that translate into currency, or does that impact on art history?
I think the fashionable idea is problematic in itself. Just because we're no longer being ignored doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're fashionable. 15 years ago, you maybe read a lot less about contemporary African art. But that was because there were active systems in place that sort of tried to ignore it and speak about it in problematic terms. Just because we're now part of the conversation doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're the next big thing. And to answer your question, does it translate into currency? I wish.
So I had mentioned earlier about the role of curators in the trajectory of art and how it impacts on the global art market. And we've also seen the recent development of international art institutions of now having dedicated curators on African art, and how some of these institutions have gone on to acquire some of these pieces. Now, when one looks or read the FT, so I'm going to, again, to Residencies. Is then African contemporary art undervalued in comparison to the artists from other continents? Because, I mean, I still see lesser zeros, 3, 4 figures.
We just have to walk maybe 200 meters that way to see a whole lot of zeros. There's a beautiful El Natsui piece hanging in Unlimited, which you all should go and see. And I love the work, and I think it's worth what it's priced at. But undervalued would be a term I wouldn't think of. I think when you read about African art being undervalued, they're comparing market stars in Europe and the States with emerging artists in our part of the world, and that's apples and oranges. If you compare Julie Moretu or Nicholas Klobo or El Natsui or Mesha Gaba with their contemporaries with other backgrounds, other geographic backgrounds, I think their prices are roughly the same. I think their values are roughly the same. So to put it together as a category and say that is undervalued completely eliminates the very fine. We're not all part of one big art market. There's at least 12 or 20 art markets at play here in Basel, all in the same week. And I think saying African art as a category is undervalued, almost like you should invest in I don't know, medical stocks now, is completely sidesteps the issue that it's individual careers that are unfolding against the global market.
What's the real value? Who puts the value? I mean,
Can you expand a little bit on that? Because I have observed that Stevenson, for instance, I'm just using that, and recently they have priced some of their artists at $1 range. And
dollars, euros. I mean, we get this question often, especially now that the South African rand has dropped quite a bit. People they see the dollar price tag and they think it's some sort of money-making scheme on our part. And it's actually a logistical issue. For example, Zanele Moholi has a fantastic gallery in New York and a fantastic gallery in South Africa. We cannot expect the gallery in New York to price in rands, because then the prices would fluctuate and drop and go up quite quickly over the year. We can also not, in this hyper-connected world, have different prices in the Joburg gallery and in the New York gallery. So the only practical solution really is to price it in dollars. If you think of Robin, he's been living in Berlin for 20 years. His mortgage is in euros. It would be completely bizarre for us to price that in rands. So I think the misperception when people see a dollar sign on our price list is that it's some sort of mercenary step on our part. It's just a practical solution to the global lives and global careers of these artists.
And then what does that mean? I mean, in terms of, don't you think that in a way then that becomes an albatross to artists from the continent? Because to look at it because in South Africa we've got, let me use the word healthy collector base. We have few artists that leave the country and come to Europe. I mean, the
healthy?
first ones was, yeah. Well, when I hear that, let me say 50-50.
50 collectors? Or?
Well, no, as in terms of a ratio. I would like to think that we have collectors within the domestic market, but what does that other than mean that if certain artworks of South African artists or African artists that are priced at $1 range create a situation where it's not
accessible to the local collectors.
To the local collectors.
That's a problem to all 6 people in South Africa who are actually buying ambitious contemporary art. 70% of our sales are probably international. You can push that down to 50 if you count South African expats. But I would take issue with the idea of a healthy collector base. I think we've got a potentially healthy collector base. There's certainly plenty of money in Johannesburg and plenty of people that can be brought on this journey. But if there is a healthy collector base, then maybe next week in Joburg you must take me and introduce me to that base, because we certainly haven't met them in our 13 years in the industry.
But I think that for our audience, I think it's also important to allow audience to understand that, you know, African art is just like a lot of economies in Africa are still emerging. It's still developing. You know, our collector base is still developing very, very slowly. So
maybe I would say maybe even quickly.
5-10 years time, there's a larger collector base happening. So, but it's up to the galleries.
I mean, it's grown 500%. We had one South African collector when we opened the gallery. Now we probably have about a dozen. So it's growing quite quickly, actually, if you see it in percentage terms.
Hence, I raised
But it's growing in South Africa, not in the rest of the continent.
Well, hence I raised the issue that doesn't then become a problem in terms of the local collectors, because now the prices are priced totally out of their reach, or is it business as usual?
I think for a decent number of the collectors, it's business as usual, because frankly, if it's in dollars or rands, if the resources are sufficient, the resources are sufficient. I also think it's an opportunity to take new collectors on a journey with artists who are living in South Africa, whose mortgages are in rands, who are not yet international names that one might find at Art Basel. And it's really the reason for local collectors to start supporting those careers that are in their earlier stages. Listen, is it difficult for some people that art that they like goes up in price just because of exchange rates and just because of the global market? Sure.
Mercedes, can you give us your insights, because you have collected widely? I mean, your focus was not narrowed only to contemporary art from Africa. You have in your collection artists from Mexico and other emerging economies.
I collect works on paper, and I haven't really general. And actually, one of the first works I bought, African artist, which is Moshe Kolanga, hadn't even opened your gallery then, 20 years back. But I never thought if he was African or not African. He was just a wonderful artist who did wonderful drawings. Just don't divide artists by countries.
And can we see a show of hands? Are there collectors in the audience? Or people who buy art? See, all right, thanks for being here. I think Mercedes really, in a way, is the model that for a gallery like ours is the most affirming. It's someone who's buying widely and also buys artists they like from our part of the world. It's also exciting for our artists, and maybe Robin can speak about that. The work gets seen in relation to, for example, you have an amazing collection of work by Francis Alice. For Mosheko, it's much more exciting to be in a collection with Francis Alice than to be in a collection with just artists from his hometown.
But at the same time, you know, it's as an artist from the African continent, I also don't always want to see my work within international collections. I like to see my work also in African collections too. So it's kind of like you know, I'd like to see the development on the continent now, so that my work can be seen not only within the international context, as much as that is so desirable for emerging artists or established artists on the African continent. But for me, can be in all the collections, all the major collections around the world. It's also good to be rooted in the country where you're from, and to allow your public or your home to access your ideas, and for your ideas to be shared amongst your community. I think that's really important, because that you plant a seed for the next generation. It doesn't make much sense if my work is only seen in European art collections. You know, I would prefer it if the next generation of South African artists, collectors, critics are able to access my work locally too, without, you know.
Maybe the conversation between the works is.
And then how do you think that can be balanced in terms of, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the two-tier pricing system, but yes, it is equally important that your work should be accessible, because I would like to believe in a way that most artists, as mirrors of the society, through their medium, highlight the challenges from where they come from, the pain, the joy, and so on. So if your work depicts the joy, the pain of where you originally come from, because of course you're inspired by where you come from. And then, yes, it can be problematic that all of your work is in all the international institutions outside of the domestic collector market.
I mean, for me, I think an important factor is the role of development. Be able to, I do go back to South Africa very often to produce work there. But for me, it's important that critics, and young artists, collectors, we work together in a community and we try and develop something that can allow the art being created on the African continent to be just as influential or to have the same gravitas as any other collections internationally. Sometimes the fault that a lot of young artists have from South Africa, for example, is that they believe that the only way you can succeed is if you leave South Africa. I think that there's been a few artists now in South Africa that have proved this wrong. That you can still succeed, that you can still have all the international acclaim, and you can still be on the African continent. You don't have to leave it.
Hence, I used the word the healthy environment. Now, to you, Joost, yes, the healthy environment within the African gallery system is that we do not have as many secondary or auction houses as in Europe. How does then, because if, for instance, Mercedes buys directly at a primary market, and then immediately there are collectors that flip the artworks, and then they enter into the secondary market, and the prices shoot up. You once said something very interesting about the importance of collectors supporting the gallery system.
I think we're at a bit of a battle for the soul of the South African collector at the moment, and we might pass the phone over to the director of the Johannesburg Art Fair, who's sitting there. If the way and I'm not a specialist in the Asian market at all, but the way I understand it is very much driven by buying at auction. In Europe, the market is very much driven by buying in galleries, and in South Africa, it hasn't quite been determined yet which of these two roads we will take. We're at a fork in the road. And I think what the Johannesburg Art Fair, what Goodman Gallery, what ourselves are trying to do is really convince collectors that the ethical way to buy art, the philanthropic way to buy art is buying from galleries. So if you buy a piece at a gallery, 50% of the money roughly goes to an artist, 50% of the money goes to a space that allows these artists to exhibit. If you're buying at auction, the money goes to the person who owned the work before, and some of it goes to the auction house that doesn't even stage exhibitions. So I think for the ecosystem in South Africa, it's vital that in the looming battle between the auction houses and the galleries, that the galleries prevail.
Most auction houses like to factor because the agreement between the consignant auction houses, they always cite provenance. And this is to you, Mercedes, and because they would say that the work of Robin, when they're selling it to someone, that his work is in the collection of so-and-so. I would like us to share your insights on that. Provenance, because auction houses like to use the word provenance, that an artist so-and-so's work is in the collection of this private collector. So they will use a certain name, and that name impacts in terms of the pricing of that. And then how do you as a collector keep works healthily without, as collectors, not directly you per se, but...
I've never bought in an auction house yet. That doesn't mean I'm not going to buy one day.
We get a round of applause for that. But.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, philanthropy.
No, philanthropy is just that I just like to go to galleries or go to fairs. I know the artists. Basically, I buy from artists I know, I get to know, and then I get interested in their work. I've never gone to an auction house, but maybe I will do. Who knows what I'm going to do? But I don't really look at if I look at catalogs, I'm not sure that provenance is so important. Work is good, and I really can't answer to that question because I really don't know. That the price should go up because it's coming from
Yes.
such and such collection. Relative.
Sitting amongst us here, we have Mandla Sbergo, who is from the Johannesburg Art Fair. I mean, what we wanted this conversation to be a bit informal yet informed. So we'd like to, as well, to someone who has an answer to some of the questions that we have raised. So, Mr. Sbergo, who is here, if you think that you can contribute and say the role that the art fairs or the proliferation of biennales in the continent, how they've impacted on the global art market.
Thanks very much. I didn't expect to be contributing. I was listening.
This is a very informal,
Very informal. I must say, first and foremost, I'm totally inspired listening to the panel today, and I think you've all raised such important points about where we find ourselves. I just wanted to say, obviously, if you look historically, I mean, I love what Robin said, is that when you look at some of the economies in Africa, they're all emerging, a lot of them. South Africa has a combination of first and third world. So our collector base comes from those two worlds as well. So there's an emerging collector base. It's not as, I guess, booming as we'd like it to be, of one that is just emerging. And I just want to say the fairs are very important. You know, in South Africa, art fairs become everything. You know, we have a shortage of museums. So they've become an important point, important platforms for people to learn about quite a lot of things. And sometimes I think a lot of pressure gets put onto them because there's this expectations that they will cover all sorts of other things. I think also the fairs are important in terms of ensuring that we create this creative economy on the continent, which hasn't quite existed. And I think the role that the galleries play is critical. And I certainly support very much our collaboration with the galleries in terms of making sure that money goes back to supporting the artists and again, supporting galleries, which again also play a larger role in the South African context because their work goes just beyond selling the work of the artists. They educational. They're become institutions as well, indirectly.
And to those 6 people who raised their hands earlier and identified themselves as collectors, I think it's really important that if you start looking at African art and how it fits into your collection, there's been great initiatives like 154 in London, the Armory Show had a focus on Africa, and we need all of that. But what we need more than anything is a home game. So Sandton City instead of Somerset House. So if you start looking at contemporary South African art, contemporary African art, I think it's important that you visit the fair that Mandla has just taken over. It's the first week of September, I think, a fantastic start to the season. So please harass him afterwards for dates. They've got VIP passes, a growing VIP program. And really the best way to do it is to go and look. Get books, start looking at art. If you come, we can set up studio visits and really do your research. That's just my shameless plug for the Joburg Art Fair. Thank you.
You're doing a great job.
And thank you, Art Basel, for letting me do this.
It becomes, for a lack of a better word, an art safari. Mandla, Mercedes. That's anthropological.
Can't always be politically
correct. Mandla, Mercedes would like to pose a question on you.
Just a question. Do you have a percentage of non-South African, what percentage do you have of non-South African galleries in Johannesburg? Because in 154, for example, although it's a very good door to open for African art, there are not that many galleries which are actually in the continent because they can't afford to be.
Absolutely. I think you've...
So how can they...
yeah, percentage-wise, just to punt a little bit about the fair this year, the Johannesburg Art Fair...
No, I think, listen, you can take my seat.
Sure, no problem. We're producing our 9th edition, and I think it's quite inspiring that we started this journey a long time ago when there was no buzz about African art as there is now. We've always embraced the continent, and it's gotten so much better over the years. I mean, Ethiopia has its first gallery. Ethiopia is like the third largest country in the whole continent and has not had a gallery. So we now have one that's coming to the fair. So percentage-wise, we're seeing quite a growth. You know, this year we'll have 12 galleries coming from East Africa, as an example, which is a big achievement. So we're getting there. Zimbabwe is coming on board. Ghana we had one gallery. I think we'll end up having two. So yeah, so when you travel the continent, you get to see that we don't really have galleries. They're starting to be set up. Also, there's a lot of people who are going back home, you know. If you go to Addis Ababa, when I started going to Addis Ababa about 7 years ago, there were not a lot of people who were returning. And there's a lot of people who are now going back and are starting to slowly collect art from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mandla. Joost, you've mentioned something that has got to do about the cost of galleries coming to these art fairs. And I'm going to pose a question to you, Joost, that how do you then balance between supporting artists, that is the creative industries, and operating and coming to these global art fairs?
I'm not sure I'm understanding.
The question is, as a gallerist who's coming from the continent, because there have been a lot of saying that it has been extremely expensive or hard for gallerists from the continent to go to Amory, to go to FIAC, to go to Art Basel. So the question is, as a gallerist from the continent, you have managed as Stevenson to keep on coming back. And how do you then balance that between supporting creative industries and also promoting the contemporary art narrative?
I mean, first of all, doing art fairs is expensive for any gallery. Yes, we have a little bit higher shipping costs. Maybe the exchange rate is unfortunate. But there's many young galleries from anywhere in the world. You can come from Berlin to Basel, and for a young gallery, that's a real strain. I don't want to make us out like we're the poor cousin and it's so extra difficult for us. It's always a balance. And it's also, you know, it's a reason we're taking a bigger booth again this year in Joburg than we did last year. There's art fairs starting in Accra and in Lagos this year. Whether they make sense or are successful, we don't know, but we immediately committed to a booth in Lagos this week because it's important that those platforms get supported. But how we do it, I don't know. Every month, it's a miracle when we pay all of our salaries. It's a miracle that we're still open 13 years later. So how we do it, I'd like to pose a question to you now, Robin, because you curated at the video art at Amory at Focus.
Yeah.
Do you think it is very important for this international fest to have a focus on Africa, or do you think that there is something problematic about narrowing the international scope into the focus on Africa now, which has happened in Amory, hasn't happened much at Basel, though?
No, I do think it is problematic. I don't think that there has to be a particular African focus as such. I rather believe in the idea of inclusion. I think that African artists can be more inclusive, but definitely not under the label of contemporary African art, because I feel that now, art from the continent is becoming so relational to other contexts, to other currencies, to other issues politically or socially around the world. So I do find that these kind of labels are a bit problematic, but at the same time, I believe that there has to be a stronger element of inclusion, that galleries, curators, and the power players in the art world need to, place a larger focus on art from the continent without placing the label on it. You know what I mean?
Maybe this is a good segue to Mercedes. We all heard about Tate Modern opening or reopening this week. And Mercedes has been incredibly supportive of their efforts to be more inclusive. Can you speak a little bit about how art from our part of the world has been included in the new? You've already seen it, I haven't. How have the efforts of your committee, Mercedes chairs the Africa Committee at Tate, how have your efforts been included in the new installations?
The committee has been around for 4 or 5 years now, and I think we're starting to grow an important collection, not as large as the other committees, because there are many more members, and ours is a small one. But I think we have great pieces now in the new building. There's Alexander, there's Meshach Gaba. So there's really been an effort to show it in the new and in the old building. If you go to London, please go, not only to see the African art, but to see the new display of the collection, which is incredible.
Very good point, Mercedes. I'm gonna again look at the institutions. Now, I am not too sure.
And sorry, by the way, there was last year we had in display a painting of Picasso next to El Salahi, Ibrahim El Salahi, which was absolutely incredible. For example, so there is a conversation between.
The next question is, sorry, Robin.
Can I just bring one issue with regards to international institutions and African art? I try and see as much exhibitions as I can if I'm visiting a particular city or if I'm traveling in a particular country. I'm still not impressed by the amount of commitment shown by international museums. I'm not impressed at all. I'm not impressed also by for example, let's take New York, Chelsea art galleries as a perfect example. There's over 300 galleries in Chelsea alone. How many African artists have had solo shows there?
Jack Scheinman, yes.
Probably 3 or 4.
I mean, I started
Jack Scheinman is one gallery in the entire New York art scene. How many African artists, born and educated, are showing in Chelsea at the moment over the last 10 years? I still think it's not enough.
Because I think in the US, collectors are more interested in Afro-American artists than in African artists.
My take, Robin.
But the point is just that I still think that there has to be further development with this. And over the last 10 years, how many African artists are showing at Art Basel? How many African artists are represented by galleries in Berlin? How many African artists are represented in galleries in Paris, for example? There's a handful. In 300 galleries, almost 400 galleries in New York, is what, 5 contemporary African artists with commercial representation? And suddenly African art is like the hippest, hottest topic at the moment. I'm sorry, I'm not impressed at all.
I had used the word undervalued.
We have less galleries. There are less galleries in the continent. It's much harder for that to show.
I think what Robin is getting at, or what I think you're getting at.
I totally agree with you.
Can I come into that? My suspicion, and understand to be corrected, is that I see that these museums or institutions are just filling up the gaps that are emanating from their past acquisition policies. So when you say to me that they are in great support, probably that's a topic for another day. That it took Tate Modern for so long to have a retrospective of Ibrahim El Salahi.
At least
Tate buys like 4 or 5 works a year, which I think for buying nothing a few years ago, I think it's a great improvement. And hopefully, if there are more members that want to come to the committee, there'll be more money. It's all a question of funds. And we don't have
I do think
enough
the development, this institutional focus has to be a bit more faster in terms of also not only relying on local galleries on the African continent, but having these large institutions play a role in the development of art.
So Robin, let's start a campaign right here. We're on the Art Basel stage. 1 per gallery. We don't need galleries to focus on contemporary African art. People don't focus on contemporary French art either. But if every gallery just has 1 African artist, it would radically change. We're being told to stop.
It's just getting hot. It's just getting hot. It's just heating up right now. Why you want to...
Okay, that is great, because hence I use the word that it will be informal but informative. So we open it up. And I would like to say quickly that I do not have all the answers. So any person within this crowd who has an answer on some of the questions can come in.
Hi, thank you. My name is Tayyab. I'm originally from Damascus, Syria, currently live in San Francisco, and I feel a lot of what you guys are saying and talking about. Because all of a sudden, I visit Berlin frequently, and all of a sudden there's a very big focus on the Syrian art and the Syrian artists just because of the diaspora situation. And some of the galleries are putting really tired shows just because the artist is from Syria. And we as artists don't necessarily need to be identified, and thank you for that. We don't want to be labeled by South African or Syrian. We are artists. And I think a lot of the common threads that I've listened throughout the presentation here stems down from how do you give more presence or exposure to the artist? And what I see missing is the focus on film, because film actually is the medium that can integrate and commission artists in, and help them travel internationally. And the artist in residency, there's very little focus on artists in residencies. And we have established exchange platforms in San Francisco between Costa Rica, San Francisco, or other underprivileged countries. And I think that's what I hear. What I don't hear much about is who is providing artists in residency and commissioned work to African artists, to Syrian artists.
Well, I, for example, support an artist a year at Gasworks in London, and an artist from Africa. Other people do it. Not in
You said San
Gasworks, but in
Francisco?
other institutions in the UK.
Headlands in San Francisco has been incredibly supportive of artists from our part of. But there are specific residency programs that really make an effort.
I just also want to say that I think that the focus of our discussion, we're not trying to pinpoint particular artistic mediums. You mentioned film. We're not trying to sort of focus on a particular medium of art from a particular region of the world, whether it's painting, drawing, or film or sculpture, for example. It's more a generalized kind of topic that we're speaking about. But I understand that certain mediums do have a larger communicative aspect. So
And costs a lot more to make sometimes.
Coming back to you and talking about the issue of international residencies, sitting amongst us here is Joseph Gaylard, who is the head of Pro Helvetia in Johannesburg, and they've been actively involved in these cultural exchanges. Joseph, putting you on the spot, can you give us a little bit of your insight of the role of Pro Helvetia and some of these international cultural agencies?
So as you can see, we throwing the Q&A back at you people, right? So you don't have to ask us questions. We're going to find you, and we're going to ask you guys questions.
Joseph Gaylard.
I mean, I don't have a lot to say on this, other than that I think it's something that takes time, and that for us, we committed to a kind of medium long-term process of exchange, to collaborations that are given time to develop, and that there aren't any quick fix solutions to the kinds of issues that have been raised here.
Thank you, Joseph.
Well, I have something to say. I'm Koyo, and I've been sitting here listening to you very seriously. I think that there is a lot of confusion on this panel, except for Robin, who has a very clear language, and it's not surprising. He's an artist, to speak clear. And I think that just to go back very quickly to the part of the discussion in the beginning, where they seem to be playing against, within or without the continent, what is happening on the continent, or what is not happening, or what is happening elsewhere, or playing Joburg Art Fair against 154 or whatever. I think it's absolutely not necessary, because we deal with a territory that needs as many voices and platforms as possible, be it in Kuala Lumpur, or in San Francisco, or in Dakar, or in Nairobi, or in Paris. It doesn't matter. This is, I think it's very, very important to understand. And I think also that it is not about sort of, calculating how many so-called African galleries participate at Joburg Art Fair, or at 154, or whatever. What is important to see is how many galleries deal with African artists. It doesn't matter their background, just as it shouldn't matter also the background of the artist, if they live within the continent or not. I think it's really important to get out of this kind of, classification and exclusions and realize that we deal with the territory that still needs a lot of development on all levels, on institutional level, on critical level, on commercial level,
educational
level. And there are many different players and people doing that from within, from without. And I think that is what is important. I mean, I don't know if it's really healthy for any gallery, be it African or whatever, to wait for 15 years to be admitted at Art Basel, like Stevenson had to do, So I think it's really important to understand that we have to build different voices and different platforms to promote that. And not to say, oh no, at 154 it's like this, and at Joburg at Fair it's like that, but these are not Africans, and so and so. So I think it's really that we deal with that.
Thank you, Koyo. And just to add as well, I think it is also very important that we create, to add on what you're saying, intra-continental dialogues, and to look at the different iPhones, whether is it the Lusophone, the Francophone, and the Anglophone.
Sorry. I actually would like to follow up in some way, and exactly also to your remark you made right now. I mean, the discussion in the beginning was very much like the international art world being the European US art world and the African art world on the other hand, where we mainly talked about Johannesburg. So that was kind of quite an extreme dichotomy, which I think is dissolving now slowly. And there are like 2 points I want to mention. In one hand, of course, there's this economic disparity, which you will see also in the collector bases. But I think there are also collector bases emerging on the continent itself, in Luanda, in Kinshasa, in Dakar, not only in Johannesburg. This is the one thing. On the other hand, we have artists who are constantly traveling all over the world. So they actually also are already part of the international market, even if they're traded in some way as African artists. And on the other hand, what struck me most perhaps is when we talk about an international art world, we seem to talk about the Western or European art world. But actually Africa as a continent is huge, with very diverse cultures, cities, classes, constituencies. And so why not talk about the international art world and actually talk about the African continent as an international art world, which also with its networks developing, with the cooperations taking place between very different institutions on the continent, there's actually an internationality too, which is very closely linked to the American and the European one, of course, but also is establishing something on its own. That's just kind of thrown into the field. I would be happy if you could pick it up in some ways and perhaps comment on the collector basis.
I just want to say something. I mean, we have mentioned Johannesburg a lot. That's just our point of reference, our place of reference. We're not trying to say that Johannesburg has priority or a greater focus in the rest of the continent. It's just that we are from South Africa, so we're using that as our place of a reference point for us in our discussions.
The word Western. Mercedes, you seem to agree with that. I mean, I do agree with you, Fiona. Can we hear your event? Can we share with us with your insights on that?
Huh?
On internationalization, rather than to be talking about, not to talk about the international art world. We talk about, because Africa is, as Fiona is saying, that it is a continent with 54 countries.
And totally diverse. They do different art everywhere. We did have a base on South Africa, but I think the continent is much bigger than all that.
Also, I think us sitting here in Koya, I agreed with everything you said, and I think if I set it up as some sort of competition, then I didn't express myself clearly enough. I think the very fact that we're sitting here, I mean, it's still the 4 o'clock slot on Sunday, but we're sitting here on this stage, is because of the very hard work that people like yourself, people like Robin, other curators have been doing over the years. And I do think 154 has opened people's minds incredibly. But I don't think, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to try people to now get people to come to Johannesburg. That's part of my responsibility to my artists. But I agree with you that it's not. We're at a stage very much where more is better because there is so little. So I think all of these things fit together. I think the work that Mercedes is doing at Tate fits together with the work that Andile is doing. He's been very modest about the collector development in Joburg that Andile has been working on. The work that 154 has been doing, not to mention raw materials. I think all of these things set up an ecosystem. And Art Basel, as part of that, it's not just these other initiatives. It's really an ecosystem that supports each other and things lean on each other in ways that you might not even always expect. So if I set it up as a tension or a conflict, it was maybe in part to put Mandla on the spot, in part because I really do think people should come to Johannesburg. But I think the more, the better. I think the people in this room, there are many people in this room actually that I see that are building that ecosystem together. So thank you.
Hello, I am an artist. My name is Mateo Blue, and internationally, I don't like to label myself as an African American, but to be able to understand globally where I'm coming from, that's the label that's over my head. And to answer a statement that you made earlier, Mercedes, about the support that quote-unquote African Americans receive in America, it's basically the same situation we're talking about here on the stage. And me, myself, as far as the art that I focus on, it's not African-based, even though I'm very, very, very connected to my culture and to my history. And even far as looking at Africa as a whole and the history of Africa as a whole, it expands out globally itself. So the art itself should speak for the world itself, and the focus doesn't have to be on so much of an African so-called history base of the format of what everyone sees African art as. It's bigger than that. It's an actual representation of the world. And to see the actual format or equation of what makes the art world, as far as the artists, the galleries, the auctions, the collectors, at the end of the day, it's all about the money. So the collecting kind of trickles down to the galleries. The galleries, it trickles down to the artists. So talking the 50-50 being the best, basically, solution. I understand business, that may be, but I feel like it can be more of an actual pressure from those that actually collect and that the galleries respond to. I know it's a whole hustle also business-wise, as far as the galleries staying open, and congratulations to you working as hard to be able to get on the stage. But I'm also abstract, so I'm not trying to go abstract within my question, but just letting it be known that this discussion and this situation expands out to a global representation of what we're talking about, not just within and without Africa. It's all of us.
Bravo.
Thank you.
We have come to the end of this interesting conversation, which we can always continue outside of this and to hear other people's insights on this very wide and complex topic. Yes, Africa is a continent and is a social construct. Thank you very much, and hoping to see you next year in Johannesburg or Dakar.